Category O, Lecture 25, Cell Combinatorics. So in this lecture, we will talk in more detail about Kazhdan-Lusztig cell combinatorics and its relation to Category O. Let us start with our setup. Let G be a semi-simple finite-dimensional complex Lie algebra with a fixed triangular decomposition into the negative part and minus, the Cartan subalgebra H, and the positive part and plus. Consider the principal block O0 of the BGG category O associated to this triangular decomposition. The category O0 is equipped with an action of the category P of projective endofunctors, and we denote by O0 upper Z and P upper Z the graded lifts of O0 and P respectively. As usual, the Weil group is denoted by W, and the Hecke algebra of W is denoted by H. So we have the ungraded and the graded categorification theorem. The ungraded categorification theorem says that the action of the category P of projective endofunctors of O0 on O0 categorifies the right regular representation of the integral group algebra of the Weil group. The graded categorification theorem says that the action of the graded version of P on the graded version of O0 categorifies the right regular representation of the Hecke algebra. Let us now recall in more detail various bases in this categorification. The category O0 has the following families of structural modules. All of them are indexed by the elements in the Weil group W. So we have the simple module LW, its indecomposable projective cover PW, and the indecomposable injective envelope IW, the Verma cover delta W of LW, and the dual Verma module nabla W, and also the indecomposable tilting module TW. Recall that the images in the Grothendieck group of O0 of each of these families of structural modules form in this Grothendieck group a basis. Further, we have the indecomposable projective functors theta W also indexed by the elements in the Weil group. And the images of these indecomposable projective functors in the split Grothendieck group of the category P form there a basis. This is the Kazhdan-Lusztig basis of this Grothendieck group. The graded Grothendieck groups are naturally modules over the algebra of Laurent polynomials in the variable v with integral coefficients, where the variable v itself is interpreted as the shift of grading. And combining all the above, we get natural bases also in the graded Grothendieck groups. It will be important for today to remember that the action of P on O0 is a right action. When we track the indices of how elements in P act on the elements in O0, we need to multiply indices on the right. So now let us define and discuss Kazhdan-Lusztig preorders and cells. So for each W in W, we have the corresponding Kazhdan-Lusztig basis element HW underlined in the Hecke algebra H. And all Kazhdan-Lusztig elements form the Kazhdan-Lusztig basis of H. So denote by alpha x, y, z the structure constants of H with respect to this basis. So if I multiply Hx underline with Hy underline, I get a sum over all z in W, Hz underline with a coefficient alpha x, y, z. And each alpha x, y, z is a Laurent polynomial in V with non-negative integer coefficients. Now let us define the following partial preorders on W. So they are less or equal L, less or equal R, and less or equal J. So we say that Y is left less or equal to Z if and only if there is an element x such that alpha xyz is non-zero. So this means that we can multiply xy underlined with something on the left to get hz underlined with a non-zero coefficient in front of it. On the other side, we say that x is right less than or equal to z if and only if there is y such that alpha xyz is non-zero. This means that we can multiply hx underlined on the right with something to get hz underlined with a non-zero coefficient. And we say that w is two-sided less than or equal to z if and only if there are x, u, and y such that the product of alpha x w u, alpha u y z is non-zero. So this means that we can multiply hw underlined on the left with something and then on the right with something to get hz underlined with a non-zero coefficient. After these pre-orders, we define the equivalence relation equivalent L, equivalent R, and equivalent J on W as follows. Two elements are left equivalent if and only if one of them is left less or equal than the other one, and vice versa. Two elements are right equivalent if one of them is right less than or equal to the other one, and vice versa. And similarly, two elements are two-sided equivalent if and only if one of them is two-sided less than or equal to the other one, and vice versa. The equivalence classes for these equivalence relations are called cells. Left cells for the relation L, right cells for the relation R, and two-sided cells for the relation J. Here is an SL2 example. In the case of SL2, the while group consists of the elements E and S. So the Kazhdan-Lusztig element for E is just a standard basis element, HE, and the Kazhdan-Lusztig element for S is HS plus VHE. Here is a multiplication table for the elements in the Kazhdan-Lusztig basis. HE underline is the identity, and HS underline square is equal to V plus V inverse HS underlined. From this multiplication table, we see that the left cells are given as follows. So E is the left minimal element, and S is the left maximal element. This is because starting from HE, we can get HE and HS. Multiplying on the left, starting from HS, we can only get HS. If we look at the columns of this table. Similarly, for the right cells, if you look at the rows of this table, we see that the E is a minimum element and S is the maximum element for the right order, so we also have the same two right cells. And similarly for the two-sided cells. So E is the minimum two-sided cell and S is the maximum two-sided cell. So let us go to a little bit bigger SL3 example. So in this case, W consists of E, S, T, ST, TS, and W0. For simplicity, let us denote HW underlined simply by W underlined for W in the while group. So here is a left multiplication of the Kazhdan-Lusztig basis elements by the generating Kazhdan-Lusztig elements of the simple reflections underlined. So if we multiply with S underlined, E goes to S underlined, S underlined goes to V plus V inverse S underlined, T goes to ST underlined, so ST underlined goes to itself times V plus V inverse, TS goes to S underlined plus W0 underlined, so this is the most non-trivial product, and W0 underlined goes to itself times V plus V inverse. And for multiplication with T, we just swap the roles of S and T. From this table, we have the following graphs of left and right multiplication by S depicted in the teal color and by T depicted by the purple color. So starting from E, we can multiply on the left with S to get S, then we multiply on the left with T to get TS, Multiplying this with t gets us the same element with some coefficient. Multiplying again by s, we get both s underlined and w0 underlined. So this is the graph of left multiplication by the Kazhdan-Lusztig elements corresponding to the simple reflections. And on the right-hand side here, we see the action graph of right multiplication by Kazhdan-Lusztig elements corresponding to simple reflections. For this, we can draw the following egg box diagram for S3. So in this diagram, rows are right cells, columns are left cells, rectangles are two-sided cells, and the two-sided order increases top to bottom. So we have the unique minimum two-sided cell consisting of the identity element, and it's also a left cell and a right cell. And we have a unique maximum two-sided cell consisting of the longest element in the while group, and it's also a left cell and the right cell. And in between, we have a two-sided cell which consists of 4 elements. It has 2 left cells, S and TS, and also ST and T, and it has 2 right cells, S and ST, and also TS and T. So this is a very convenient way to depict combinatorial structure of Kazhdan-Lusztig cells. Taking into account our categorification theorem, we can describe left, right, and two-sided Kazhdan-Lusztig cells using projective functors. Proposition: for elements x and y and w, we have that x is left less than or equal to y if and only if theta y belongs to the additive closure of theta x after anything in the category P. X is right less than or equal to y if and only if theta y belongs to the additive closure of P after theta x. And x is two-sided less than or equal to y if and only if theta y belongs to the additive closure of P after theta x after P. So this follows directly from our definitions and our categorification theorems. Please note here that we see the importance of the fact that the action of P on O is a right action. So the left equivalence is given by composing with P on the right. So it corresponds to a right ideal in some sense. And the right equivalence corresponds to a left ideal in some sense. So this signifies the right nature of the action of P on O0. Additional terminology: the intersection of a left cell and a right cell is called an H cell. So in other words, we can define the equivalence relation equivalent H as the intersection of the left equivalence and the right equivalence. And the origin of all this terminology comes from Green's relations in semigroup, defined by Sandy Green in 1949, which have very similar definitions in the context of semigroups. So let us now list some elementary applications of this combinatorics. The first claim: for 2 elements x, y in W, the application of theta x to Ly is non-zero if and only if x inverse is left less than or equal to y. Proof: so we have that the module theta x Ly is non-zero if and only if it has some simple subquotient Lw. Equivalently, this means that there is a non-zero homomorphism from Pw to this module theta x Ly. So here W is some element in W. So using adjunction, we can move theta x to the left variable and get that this means that the hom from theta x inverse applied to Pw to Ly should be non-zero. Since Pw is theta w applied to Pe, the latter is equivalent to the fact that theta y appears in the additive closure of theta x inverse after something in the category P. And using the previous slide, this is equivalent to the fact that x inverse is left less than or equal to y. The next claim: if Lw is a subquotient of some theta x Ly, then W is right less than or equal to y. Proof: If we just look in the previous proof, then the assertion of this proposition follows directly from the fact that theta y is in the additive closure of P after theta w. So we just swap our accents. In this proof, we fixed x inverse and looked for arbitrary pw. Now we fixed pw and we do not care about the nature of theta x inverse. So we can look at this proof from a slightly different perspective to see that this assertion is equivalent to the fact that theta y is in the additive closure of P after theta w. And finally, the observation for any w which is right less than or equal to y, there is u in w such that Lw is a subquotient of some theta u Ly. And this again follows directly from this description that theta y belongs to the additive closure of P after theta w. So we find some theta u in P which does this job. Now let us talk about the generalization of a parabolic category O. So this is called the category OR hat. Let R be a right cell in W. Denote by R hat the set of all elements W in W which are right less than or equal to R. Then we define the category OR hat as a Serre subcategory of O0 generated by all elements LW where W is in R hat. So the importance of this category is given by the following proposition. For any fixed element W in R, the category OR hat is the minimum Serre subcategory of O0, which has the following properties. It contains LW, and it is stable under the action of P. So this follows directly from the previous slide. When we start from LW and start applying projective functors, we will get all elements Lu, where U is less than or equal to W with respect to the right order. So the corresponding Serre subcategory then should be generated exactly by the corresponding set R hat. So this category was defined and studied in my paper with Katarina in 2008. So here is an SL3 example. So we consider the case of SL3, in which case W consists of E, S, T, ST, TS, and W0. So we have the following right order on the set of right cells of W. So we have the minimum right cell E and the maximum right cell W0. And then we have two intermediate right cells, the one consisting of S and ST, and another one consisting of T and TS. And these two right cells are not comparable with each other. But of course, they are comparable with the minimum one and the maximum one. So the category OE hat is exactly the category of finite dimensional modules in O0. So it's a Serre subcategory generated by LE. The category OSST hat is the Serre subcategory generated by LE, LS, and LST. The category OTTS hat is generated by LE, LT, and LTS. And the category OW0 hat is the whole category W0. It is interesting to point out that in this particular small example, all of these categories are in fact parabolic subcategories in O for 4 different parabolic subalgebras. Let us now discuss some combinatorial symmetries of the cell combinatorics. Lemma, the map W to W inverse, is an isomorphism between the posets of W with respect to the left order and W with respect to the right order. So this follows directly from the definitions and the involution on the Hecke algebra, which maps HW to HW inverse. So here is a more advanced property. The map W maps to W0W is an anti-isomorphism of both W with respect to the left order and W with respect to the right order. Similarly, the map W goes to WW0 is an anti-isomorphism of both posets W with respect to the left order and W with respect to the right order. And the third property is that the map which maps W to W0, W0 is an automorphism of both these posets, W with respect to the left order and W with respect to the right order. Note that the last property, also it's a superposition of the first two. The last property is really easy because it corresponds to an automorphism of the Dynkin diagram, and hence follows directly from the fact that Kazhdan-Lusztig combinatorics is defined in terms of the Dynkin diagram. And for the proofs of the first two claims, I refer to subsection 6.2 in the book of Björner and Brandy. So these are certain combinatorial assertions which one needs to go through. So now let us talk about Duflo elements in right cells. Let R be a right cell in W. Let us note that because it's a right cell, for any module n and any two elements x and y in R, we have that the projective functor theta x annihilates n if and only if the projective functor theta y annihilates n. And this is because theta x belongs to the ideal generated by theta y, and then after it we can take anything from P, and vice versa. So we will simply write Rn is equal to 0 or Rn is not equal to 0 if theta x n is equal to 0, respectively not equal to 0, for all elements x in R, not W in W. Recall also that Pw is the image of Pe under the projective functor theta w. The crucial lemma for the definition of Duflo elements is the following. So if we take the intersection of all submodules in Pe such that the quotient of Pe modulo this submodule is killed by R, so if we take this intersection, we denote it Kr, so this is a submodule of Pe, and the claim is that it has simple top. Proof. Assume that Kr surjects onto a direct sum of two simple modules. So assume that this assertion is not true. Then by definition, both of these simple modules are not annihilated by R. We have that for any W in R, Pw is theta w applied to Pe, which is equal to theta w applied to Kr, because the cokernel of the inclusion is killed by theta w. Hence, for W in W, the top of the indecomposable projective module Pw, which is simple, so this top must contain the top of the non-zero module theta wl, so this is because Kr surjects onto L, and theta w doesn't kill L. But also it must contain the top of the non-zero module theta wl prime. Again, Kr surjects onto L prime, and theta w doesn't kill it. And so this top cannot be simple. This is a contradiction which proves the assertion of the lemma. So the module Kr has simple top. Let's say that this top is Ld, where D is an element in W. So this element D is called the Duflo element for the right cell R. And we denote it by dr. So the next important claim is that the element dr belongs to R. So it is an element of this right cell. By construction, the element theta w ldr surjects onto lw. So lw is a simple subquotient here. So by our characterization, it follows that w should be right less than or equal to dr. By adjunction, we also get that LDR injects into theta W inverse LW. And so this means that dr should be right less than or equal to W, which implies that dr is in the right cell R. Consider now the left cell L, which consists of all inverses of elements in R. So the next claim is actually that dr belongs to L, or equivalently dr inverse belongs to R. Later on today we will see that dr is actually equal to dr inverse, but at the present stage we do not know that. Proof: since theta w ldr is non-zero for W in R, we have the W inverse should be left less than or equal to dr. In other words, the whole cell R is right less than or equal to dr inverse. So now assume that dr inverse is not an R, and let R prime be the right cell of dr inverse, and it should be different from R. But then we can consider the Duflo element dr prime, which belongs to R prime, and since R prime is not R, dr prime must be different from dr. Since dr is certainly left less than or equal to dr, so theta dr inverse LDR is non-zero, which means that Kr must be a submodule of Kr prime. And it should be, of course, a proper submodule because dr inverse is not in R. But since Kr prime is a proper submodule, it follows that R should kill its stop. So R kills LDR prime. But on the other hand, dr inverse is right bigger than R. So if R kills LDR prime, then of course R prime must kill it as well. We get that theta dr inverse LDR prime should be zero. This contradicts the definition of the Duflo element. So this completes the proof of our proposition that both the Duflo element and its inverse belong to R. Here is the SL3 example. So in the SL3 case, W consists of im, S, T, ST, TS, and W0. And the right cells are im, S and ST, T and TS, and W0. So here is the graded picture of the dominant Verma module Pim. So this is a Löwe filtration of the multiplicity-free dominant Verma module Pim. So if you consider the right cell im, it has a unique element, so the Duflo element for E is E. Similarly, the right cell W0 has a unique element, so the Duflo element for W0 is W0. The right cell S and ST has two elements, and the simple subquotients for these elements in PE appear here and here in degrees 1 and 2. And the element in degree 1, it covers the element in degree 2, so it generates a submodule such that the cokernel E and T is killed by all elements in R. So the Duflo element for this right cell S and ST is S. Similarly, the element T is the Duflo element for the right cell consisting of T and TS. Next, we need to discuss the notion of Lustig's A function. Recall that we have the structure constants alpha x, y, z of the Hecke algebra with respect to the Kazhdan-Lusztig basis. So for z in W, define A of z as the minimal k such that if you shift the structure constant alpha x, y, z by v to the power k, we get a polynomial in V. And this should be a minimal k, which works for all possible x and y in W. So we know that these structure constants are invariant with respect to change in V to V inverse, which implies that A of z coincides with the minimal k such that shifting the structure constants by v to the power minus k gives us a polynomial in V inverse, uniformly for all x and y in W. So this function, which assigns to each element in W a non-negative integer, is called Lustig's A function. So for example, if W is S2, then we have already seen this multiplication table of elements in the Kazhdan-Lusztig basis. So in the outcome, HE only appears with shift 0. So it already has a coefficient which is a polynomial. So the A function value on E is 0. The element HS underlined appears with shift 0 here, but here we have the coefficient which is a polynomial V plus V inverse. So we need to multiply with V to get a proper polynomial in V. So which means that the value of the A function at S is equal to 1. The A function was defined and studied by Lustig in his paper Cells in Affine Weyl Groups in 1985. So let us discuss some combinatorial properties of A. Theorem by Lustig. A is constant on all left, right, and two-sided cells, and is strictly increasing along the left, right, and two-sided orders. For any element W in W, the value of A at W is at most the length of W. For any parabolic subgroup WP of W and any element W in WP, the value of the A function with respect to W and W is equal to the value of the A function with respect to WP at W. And for the longest element of a parabolic subgroup, the value of the A function at it is equal to the length of W0P. So I refer to the paper of Lustig mentioned in the previous slide for the proof of this theorem. So this is a relatively lengthy combinatorial argument. One corollary from this theorem is that if we fix a two-sided cell and takes two left cells inside it, these two left cells cannot be comparable with respect to the left order, because the value of the A function on them is the same, while it should strictly increase along the left order. And the similar statement holds for right cells. Here is the module's theoretic interpretation of the A function. So using adjunction, we easily see that A of z coincides with the maximal possible non-negative integer I, for which there exist elements x and y in W, such that applying theta x inverse to Lz has the subquotient Ly shifted by I. So we start from degree 0, apply all possible projective functors, and look at the maximal possible shift which appears in the obtained graded module in a non-zero way. So in other words, A of z is a maximal graded degree of some theta wz for some w in W. Also recall that theta w Lz is non-zero if and only if W inverse is left less than or equal to z. One can show that this maximal graded degree shift appears when you apply to Lz the projective functor theta w such that W inverse is left equivalent to z. So you can only apply things which are left less than or equal to z, and to get the maximal possible shift, you need to apply something which is left equivalent to z. And one can also show that in this case, when you apply element which is left equivalent to z, the module theta w Lz is both projective and injective in the category OR hat. We will discuss this thing in more detail in a later lecture. So here R is the right cell of Z. Then there is a general result by Martinez-Villa, which shows that projective modules over graded self-injective connected quiver algebras have the same Löwy lengths. And this and the previous description implies that A must be constant along right cells. And that it is constant along left cells can then be proved using, for example, twisting functors, or using the symmetry W goes to W inverse of the Kazhdan-Lusztig combinatorics. So in particular, this implies that A is constant along the two-sided cells. And when I refer to Martinez-Villa, I meant his theorem from the paper Graded Self-Injective and Koszul Algebras from 1999. Lustig's A function is intimately connected to Duflo elements. Directly from the definitions, it is very easy to see that Kr, which was used to define the Duflo element, this is a submodule of PE with simple top given by the Duflo element. This submodule is actually a graded submodule of PE. Let us denote by A underlined R the non-negative integer such that the corresponding symbol of the Duflo involution appearing as a top of Kr has the degree shift minus A underlined R. Recall that Kazhdan-Lusztig polynomials hxy are defined as coefficients of the transformation matrix from the standard basis to the Kazhdan-Lusztig basis. Using the Kazhdan-Lusztig polynomials, we can give an alternative description of A underlined r. A underlined r coincides with the minimal positive integer I, for which there is w in r, such that the coefficient in the Kazhdan-Lusztig polynomial HEW at the term v to the power I is non-zero. On the next slide, we will give a proof of this alternative description. But before that, here is a relation between A underlined and A. So A underlined of R coincides with the value of the A function on R. Since P dr is equal to theta dr applied to kr, it follows that A underlined R is the maximal possible degree shift when we apply theta dr to L dr. So therefore, it is given by the A function. So let us prove the alternative description. Recall that Kazhdan-Lusztig combinatorics is invariant under mapping W to W inverse, and hence it is enough to show that A underline R coincides with the minimal positive integer R, for which there is W in the left cell R inverse, such that the Vi's coefficient in the Kazhdan-Lusztig polynomial HEW is non-zero. Note that theta x Ly is non-zero for any x in R and y in R inverse. So this follows from our criterion for when the action of a projective functor on a simple module is non-zero. From this property, it follows that all composition subquotients of PE of the form Ly, where y is in R inverse, they must belong to Kr. But Kr has simple top and is a graded submodule, so this simple top appears in the minimal degree. And all other subquotients must appear in strictly higher degrees. So therefore, the minimal graded shift with which a subquotient from R inverse appears in PE is indeed given by the number A underlined R. Combined with categorification theorem and the BGG reciprocity, this corresponds precisely to our alternative description of A underlined. Let us again look at the SS3 example. In this case, W consists of E, S, T, ST, TS, and W0. And the right cells are E, W0, and then S and ST, and T and TS. And here is a graded picture of PE. So for the right cell E, the only subquotient appears in the grade 0, so the A function at E is 0. For W0, the only subquotient appears in degree 3, so the value of A function at W0 is 3. For S and ST, we have one subquotient in degree 1 and one subquotient in degree 2, so the value of the A function is a minimum, it's 1. And similarly for the right cell of T and TS. And finally, let us now prove that Duflo elements are indeed involutions. So for each right cell R, dr is equal to dr inverse. Let us consider Zergil's self-equivalence of H0011 given by swapping the sides of a bimodule. The category O version of this equivalence swaps LW with LW inverse. And it preserves the dominant Verma module delta E. So if we assume that dr is not equal to dr inverse, then both simple subquotients LDR and LDR inverse should appear with the shift minus ADR in the module PE. But since the gradient is positive, so we know that dr inverse belongs to R, and since Kr has simple top, it follows that LDR is the only subquotient indexed by an element of R which appears in PE with this shift. And so we get our contradiction. So this completes the proof of this proposition. Here are some questions for PhD students. Question number 1. Prove that W is two-sided less than or equal to Z if and only if there are x, u, and y such that alpha wu times alpha x, u, z is non-zero. Question number 2. Compute the left and right action graphs and the X-box diagrams for types B2 and G2. Question number 3. Find an example of the category OR hat, which is not a parabolic subcategory for any parabolic. Question number 4. Prove with full detail that KR is a graded submodule of P. And question number 5. Give full details for the fact that A of Z coincides with the maximal I greater than or equal to 0, for which there are x and y and w such that Ly shifted by I is a subquotient of theta x inverse Lz. Thank you very much and see you next time.